One of the most beautiful images at the start of every school year is to see the students walk from the campus to the cathedral for their opening Mass of the Holy Spirit. And as they walk down 25th Street, over the Detroit Superior Bridge, into downtown, it's a tremendous symbol for the city. They're all going to one place with a singular purpose, and that these young men from all these communities become one on that day, but not just one as we're Ignatius students. They become one with Cleveland because they see in that walk that the city is going to teach them something, that they're not just going to learn in the classroom, they're going to learn in the broader community. They're going to embrace the city, and if they embrace the city of Cleveland, it helps them to embrace the larger world.
Cleveland. Founded mere decades after the Revolution, in less than a century, it had become one of America's mightiest cities. Geography, resources, and the audacity of a few visionary tycoons combined to make Cleveland a worldwide center for steel production. A prosperous middle class managed the city's booming economy. However, it was Cleveland's working class that provided the actual muscle for this industrial powerhouse. By 1886, its ranks were swelling with a vast new tide of European immigrants, drawn by the promise of steady work and the beacon of the American dream. Cleveland's immigrants transformed entire neighborhoods with the vibrancy of their cultures. In turn, they themselves were transformed by the mysterious yet inexorable process of assimilation. Yet almost immediately, they encountered what seemed like an insurmountable obstacle. The education that held the key to their children's future was simply beyond their financial reach. Instinctively, this overwhelmingly Catholic immigrant community turned to their bishop for guidance. But where was he to turn? Who could provide the children of Cleveland's immigrant workforce with the education that would ensure their full participation in American society? And thus the story of the Jesuits in Cleveland begins.
As you may know, and people should know, the Jesuits have been thrown out of more countries than we can count. And we were thrown out of Germany. The Jesuits were thrown out of Germany around 1878, in the 1870s sometimes. And the German Jesuits came to Buffalo. And from Buffalo, they came down to Cleveland, to a German settlement here in Cleveland, and we founded a high school here in 1886.
So they came, formed a community and so on. But then part of the idea of the bishop bringing them was not just to take the parish, was to do what Jesuits did at that time largely, was to establish a boys' school. And he gave them 6 years to do this. And evidence suggests that they really putted around with this for years until 1886 showed up, and it was like, where's the school? Oh, yes, okay. Then immediately, away we went.
St. Ignatius quickly became a magnet for immigrant parents, who saw in Jesuit education and its emphasis on the fully formed man a real, perhaps the only opportunity for their children to become fully formed Americans.
The Germans who lived in the neighborhood and even outside the neighborhood sent their sons to St. Ignatius. But early on, there were a group of Irish. In fact, the German Jesuits who ran the school found the Irish boys difficult to manage. And let me tell you, they've always been difficult to manage.
As time passed, St. Ignatius students became fully acculturated. They were no longer German, Irish, Polish. They were simply American. The process called for a new American way of educating. The Jesuits abandoned the European 6-year course in favor of the American system, which separated higher education into 2 discrete periods: high school and university.
They were gradually losing their German emphasis to an extent. So they therefore also want to modify their curriculum to fit an American scene. But it had to be done in order to mainstream and put their goal ultimately was these students would get out of the ghetto, if you will, and be able to be in professions and so on. And in order to do that, they had to co-opt themselves to what the American educational scene looked like. So
the transformation may have been slow, but not the growth of the student body, which expanded in no time at all from 60 to 300. As St. Ignatius became more and more cramped, the Jesuits faced the necessity of relocating the college. In 1920, they began formal planning for what was to become John Carroll University. But how were they going to pay for it? After all, their students came from underprivileged families.
They finish it by 1935. By that time, in fact, again, you're doing with endless loans. There's a lot of people volunteering work. Some of the interior structures of John Carroll were done by carpenters, again, of German extraction for free for the priests. So, for instance, Rodman Hall, I don't know if you remember ever seeing that. Rodman Hall's dining room was done by Father Muller's father. He just did it. He was a carpenter by trade. That's what you just did in those days. So by service of kind, you may not be able to give money to the church, but you could do it in your labor. So a lot of that went on with that phenomenon. So it's quite amazing.
They barely had time to enjoy their success before another problem presented itself. Without a resident Jesuit community, who would staff the new college? While the Ignatius Jesuits were willing and available, they lived many rugged miles away. Undaunted, these intrepid professors met the challenge. They commuted by horse and buggy each way, in every kind of weather. Eventually, one dedicated Jesuit grew so frustrated by the inconvenience that he made an unorthodox and ultimately fatal decision.
So Father Odenbach was the famed seismologist, refused to commute. He said, this is ridiculous. And so he lived in his classroom. There was no other alternative. And eventually the poor man, he lived there in the wintertime. There was no heat, and at night he got cold and eventually developed into pneumonia and he died. Now, he was a very peculiar human being, apparently, so this all fit the whole scenario of his tragic end. So it's a sad story.
A sad story indeed, but indicative of the time. A period of overwhelming loss, privation, and sacrifice. The Great Depression.
By about 1930, 1931, we're really beginning to feel the effects in this part of the world of the Depression. And so there's, you're going to find certain things like tuition not being paid, services have to be cut. But you could still fairly much maintain the same curriculum because your teachers weren't being paid at all. Largely they're Jesuit scholastics and priests. They received no salary whatsoever. And the tuition would be very moderate. And they did attempt to help people with that, but we don't have a lot of evidence of what actually was done. They somehow managed to function fairly well.
I'll tell you, I really didn't want to go to St. Ignatius High School, but the family ran out of money, and that changed the whole picture. See, I had a brother that went to another school, and I was sort of planning on going there, but the way it worked out was just great with me, because once I got an Ignatius, I was as happy as can be.
In hindsight, it almost seems as if the support that ordinary people habitually gave one another during the Depression prepared them for a period of even greater hardship. Cleveland swiftly mobilized its human and material resources, and the city's disparate communities joined ranks to meet the mighty challenge. St. Ignatius, too, did its part by preparing its students for life in a nation at war. The opportunities and sacrifices of wartime would change the school in profound and sometimes unexpected ways.
During the time of World War II, we're dealing with, it's a great patriotic war on the part of American Clevelanders, being largely an ethnic mix of tremendously patriotic people. So as a result, that's going to filter itself through the school as well. So you're going to have events such as military drills, training kids to be able to go to war, also accelerating graduation. So many people would graduate in January. They sort of finish their courses, then off they would go to war. You're also dealing with, in that time zone, of course, it's very religious culture, tremendous prayers, on part of the student population for the servicemen, many of whom are their contemporaries, for heaven's sakes, and they would know these people, or their brothers and cousins. They have a great many, they're very, very close to the whole, that war was a much closer thing than war is to us, many of us today.
Their prayers were answered in May 1945, when victory in Europe was declared, and 3 months later, when Japan formally surrendered to the Allied forces. As the nation ramped down from war, it entered a period of great prosperity and calm. Perhaps it is not surprising that conformity and deferral to authority also characterized post-war America.
In the 1950s, what you're dealing with is conventional Americana, which is a world that was safe. In many ways, again, this is, post-World War II people wanted to return to normalcy, whatever that meant, as best they could, and they lived this through a boom culture. So the economics was also increasing. They had saved the world essentially from evil, as far as they understood reality, and they want their children to be involved. So there was no questioning of authority, because authority had brought us nothing but good.
But it was a more simple time. We did not lock our doors. We We trusted. We could go out at night. It was perfect, and you could go almost any place in the city, and you felt safe. Perhaps you weren't, but you did feel safe.
In some ways, St. Ignatius epitomized the American high school experience of the 1950s. However, its Jesuit values and mode of education continued to set the Ignatius student apart from the norm. No doubt these distinguishing characteristics, so admired by the community at large, and so prized by the parents of prospective students, were responsible for the school's unprecedented growth during this period.
In the 50s, of course, the Sullivan Gym was built, and they actually, in naming it after Father Sullivan, had already become an experience in his own lifetime. He was the athletic director here for some good deal of time. It shows a tremendous affection. Really, that in many ways, the naming of it for him and the affection that was shown for him at the time and also by later alumni really is a phenomenon of the 40s and 50s, of a culture that was looking for safety, that had founded an extraordinarily dedicated men, which he would certainly be an example of, who gave their whole life to and all the time they could possibly give to these young men.
The gymnasium stands as a monument, not just to one Jesuit, but to all the selfless Jesuits whose service to the school inspired so many students. By emulating their teachers' dedication, St. Ignatius students, in turn, became exemplars of the Ignatian vision. The depth of their studies certainly didn't prevent Ignatius students from enjoying a wide range of extracurricular activities, from debate to chess to football. While, strictly speaking, not sanctioned by the school, there was one extracurricular activity that is still fondly remembered by anyone who attended St. Ignatius in the 50s.
Hex was like a hamburger house, which was a pretty loose little organization run by this Mr. Heck, evidently. And students used to hang out there and smoke, which was very common in the 40s and 50s and so on. But they loved it because you could go there, and this person evidently trusted everybody, just kept a cash box open, and he would sort of make change for yourself and have a hamburger. It was a pretty dirty, greasy spoon. And then eventually, of course, now it's become this upscale restaurant, which had become already by the late 1970s. But older people, of course, remember it as this dive, with Mr. Heck presiding over making these greasy hamburgers and selling Cokes and people sneaking out for cigarettes, evidently.
The halcyon days of sneaking smokes at Hex passed, and a more turbulent era descended over the nation. Cleveland was particularly hard hit by the social disquiet of the 1960s, experiencing not only racial and generational conflict, but the added burden of an imperiled inner city.
Words never hurt anybody.
The economic downturn of the 60s was disastrous for Cleveland. Businesses folded or decamped for the suburbs, and any city resident who could afford to quickly followed. St. Ignatius found itself in a dilemma. Should it follow the middle class into the suburbs, or should it stay to serve those who were left behind? Threatened by significant loss, caught in the agony of unasked-for change, St. Ignatius was a microcosm of the Catholic Church itself. Vatican II called the entire Church to renewal. St. Ignatius responded in countless ways. Perhaps the most significant was a serious reconsideration of its very mission. Inspired by the Council's lofty challenge, the debate over moving from or staying in the city gained momentum.
We thought it was not the time for the Jesuits to run from the cities. Ignatius placed us in cities, and Ignatius loved us to be in the city because that's where the people are. And we are a religious order that sees the world as something very good. And we want to be a part of that. We want to be a part of the success of the city. And we know that takes a lot of labor, but it's well worth it because it's for the good of the people of the city. So we decided to stay and say, not run, stay, and we're going to make this place the best, that it is in the area around it.
It was good because you had to adjust to situations that were unknown, and things didn't go all your way, and you can't sit down and pout because that doesn't solve the problem.
The decision to stay in the city would have profound consequences, not the least of which was a commitment to expand and improve the facilities on West 30th Street. Once again, the Jesuits were faced with that persistent question: where was the money to come from? This time, the answer lay in a capital campaign, one of unprecedented proportion. The ensuing period of construction revitalized the school, providing it with the facilities necessary to its mission. It also provided an inadvertent wealth of anecdotes, many of which have passed into Ignatius lore.
The great legend is there was one building that was a holdout that's now in the back field, and these people were there asking an astronomical sum, or they were not terribly interested in selling, and miraculously one night it went up in flames, and that was the end of it, so we could just buy their property. So poor Father O'Reilly became Torch O'Reilly because they were convinced he was an arsonist, which he was not. I'm almost certain that, I'm not absolutely certain he wouldn't have done such a thing, but it stuck, and it became like the great joke that, watch out or we'll burn your building down, you don't sell it to us.
There was a fire in it, and they thought that I had something to do with that. And they said, if you want a building, tell O'Reilly, and he'll torch it. But that was not the case.
Torch O'Reilly's legendary fire had been extinguished. But American society almost immediately encountered what seemed like an insurmountable obstacle.
The Vietnam War soured a lot of people, certainly the young. And that was the time when it became popular not to trust anyone who was 30 years or older. And maybe it was, the fact that, first of all, the drugs were coming into our life much more, into our awareness much more. There was the war, which was a horrible thing. And so many marvelous young men and women were killed that it was a terrible thing. And people asked, why? For what purpose?
One particular event at St. Ignatius illustrates the explosive nature of life in the 70s, and the most ordinary occurrences could ignite into pitched battles over notions of personal rights and civic authority.
The school had a dress code policy that also dealt with hair length. But these 4 Jesuits opposed the president's dress code policy, and so he fired them. Now, this is unheard of course. Well, this created tremendous commotion. It was even in the New York Times, imagine that. So it must have been a really slow news day.
I think some people looked at American society and thought things were kind of getting a little too loose, a little too out of control. Hair was maybe one indicator for, how tight an institution was being, run. But I think the administration just felt that there were certain norms that they wanted enforced. Others thought that the norms were not, right. And somehow for a length of hair to be a cause célèbre, I think we would kind of laugh at that, today. But in those days, that was kind of considered, important by some people.
St. Ignatius heeded the many changes in American culture, particularly the yearning for a new sense of personal responsibility, one that would extend globally, from the individual to society as a whole.
The 28th General of the Jesuit Order, Father Pedro Arrupe, was giving a talk in Valencia, Spain, and he was talking about what kind of graduates we need for the world today. It was a landmark talk because he said we need men for others who are willing to engage in the pressing needs of a day, the pressing needs of the times, and that they would be men for others after the man for others, Jesus Christ, that they would give of themselves, that their education wasn't to further themselves, to make themselves richer, to make themselves more important, but it was exclusively in service of others.
For us, the development, the formation of a young man into coming to know who Christ is and becoming a friend of his. That's what it means then to be a man for others. You see, you have skills, you have opportunities, you're going to have success. Forget yourself and think of others, especially those who do not have what you have. And there are so many people, even in our neighborhood, who do not have what these young men have and perhaps never will.
Being a man for others for me is enlarging my territory, just going out and giving back what I was taught. Giving back to others who deserve an education like St. Ignatius High School, making sure that they graduate in 4 years and giving them the foundation that St. Ignatius gave me. Just always committed to doing justice, committed to doing what others need me to do and working through God, working for God, that God works through me.
You don't see it as clearly in a sophomore as you do in a senior. Sometimes a sophomore almost tests the motto. Let's see if this is really true or if this is just a PR stunt. Is this just something that helps sell the institution? A senior knows it because he's gone through those years. He's seen the struggle. He's seen his own development tested, and he walks away from here saying, I know who I am, and I know what's needed of me in the world.
I've realized more and more it's not just about me. There's other people in the world. When I came in, I wasn't really thinking about anybody else. But after coming here, it's just the world is opened up.
I think that's the critical age of in education, is that that's when you really begin to understand what life is all about.
The question comes, what is your life worth? What kind of a man are you? What's important to you? Where does Jesus Christ stand in your life? Is he important or is he not? And I used to say to the kids, we can have all the national merit semifinalists going. We can win as many state football titles and other titles as we have. But if you have not had the opportunity to come to know, love, and serve Jesus Christ, we have failed you. We have failed you.
You can't become a man for others until you discover who the other is.
Folks of this community, yes, there's confrontation, yes, there's controversy, yes, there's differences of opinion, but in the end, we all come together and are able to put together a project like this.
We knew we had to expand, but we wanted to be sure that we were just. And we started a marvelous program called the Aruba Neighborhood Partnership. And we spent a lot of time and a lot of money helping people move and even setting them up in new places.
Father Pedro Arupe, the Superior General of the Society of Jesus, is the one who really pushed the Jesuits, to take a look at the neighborhood.
We also built 7 homes in the neighborhood for the people of the neighborhood in order to show our own care and desire to have all kinds of people live in the neighborhood. But you know, it's always interesting how you come across to your neighbors. And we were looked upon by some people in the neighborhood as that big school. And I said, oh, that's very bad. We must change that. We must move out and we must open ourselves and embrace the neighborhood and make ourselves a part of the neighborhood. And that is what we have done. We have done that. I think we've done that in spades.
By turning the school's resources towards the immediate neighborhood, by committing itself to partnership within the community at large, and by the consistent synthesis of these experiences with the students' traditional classroom work, St. Ignatius was reborn.
Well, you know, 1988, we had a great football team, and in that 1988 season, they made the playoffs for the first time, and we actually get to the championship game down at the Horseshoe in Columbus. We have a situation in the game where we're coming down to the last 2 minutes of the game, and we have a 10-7 lead, and Princeton has the ball, and they're coming down the field. Now, you've got to understand at that moment, that was one of the largest crowds of Ignatius fans, Ignatius alumni, Ignatius students ever to gather in one place to see that. The electricity in the air was absolutely incredible. And then Princeton starts their inexorable march, it seemed, down the field inside our 10-yard line. Before you know it, it's like first and goal. It was just, you know, a few feet, you know, to go with the clock at a minute and the clock moving and everyone there watching this. And to see how Ignatius was able to stop Princeton, and then time runs out, they win their first championship. It was a magical moment for St. Ignatius. That's all I can say, and for all the people that had a chance to be there and to share in that.
I myself, of course, was home with the flu while this thing was going on, listening to the Romanian Baptist Hour by mistake, so it was the interference. But it was a wonderful sense of almost redefining the school in the sense of tremendous pride in the institution. Not that it hadn't been there before, but it gave an extra added impetus to all this as well. It almost, all by itself, helped create a sense of real identity to the school, but it also transferred itself. It wasn't just football, it was the whole phenomena as the school is developing in 3 basic areas, you know, athletically, spiritually, and then the extracurricular and academics. That all these things together created the excellent school and a sense of tremendous pride. And some of these magically all cohesed together without even trying, just happened.
In 2006, Pope Benedict XVI urged Jesuits worldwide to remain true to the ambitions and passions of their founder, St. Ignatius of Loyola.
One of the things Pope Benedict XVI highlighted was the work Jesuits were doing in the colleges. In the European context, a college refers to a secondary school. He loved the work the Jesuits were doing in the secondary schools.
Continuate, cari Gesuiti, in questo importante apostolato, mantenendo inalterato lo spirito del vostro fondatore. Parlando di Sant'Ignazio,
continue, dear Jesuits, this great work, keeping the spirit of your founder unchanged. Working in a Jesuit school and to hear from the Holy Father a call to continue this great tradition of Jesuit secondary education was very meaningful for us, and it was very memorable for us because it placed us in the context of the larger church, the larger world, and it helped us to realize that this institution will go on for more than another 120 years. So when people see our 19th century landmark tower, they see something that is firmly rooted, something that is not going to die.
It's kind of a thank you, Lord, for, my being here and for the school being the place that I still want to be.
I can't describe it in a few sentences. It's too big, too important in my life.
I guess it's also a sort of a love for the school, and it really is a wonderful feeling when I see it and go, yeah, I go there.
It's always been that beacon. It's always been, there's Ignatius. It's right there. And then, more recently, we put lights on the tower so that a lot of people could see it, and a lot of people could enjoy it and appreciate it. I know I have. It has been a great deal to me because in just a tower, it sums up for me the experience of this school. Nothing better, nothing.
The tower is a beacon. It's a beacon that calls people to tradition, to history, and to great education. And as an anchor, it draws more people to live in the city, more people to the community, perhaps to send their children to study here at the school. And it represents hope for a northern city that has faced challenges but believes that its rich roots will continue for centuries to come.
A tradition of Ignatian spirituality, nourished by generations of faculty and staff, Jesuits and their partners, men and women, all of them devoted to the Jesuit ideal. A history that binds it to the city of Cleveland and inspires its students to develop lifelong habits of generosity and service to their families and their community. An education unlike any other, based on a rigorous system developed 4 centuries ago in the great universities of Europe, responsive to the needs and challenges of the 21st century. Imbued with a philosophy that sees good in all of God's creation, incorporating the highest standards of academic achievement, and committed to the total development, mental, physical, and spiritual, of every student, for the greater glory of God.